Welcome back to the Chefpreneur podcast. I'm your host, Andres Hauser. Thank you guys for tuning in today. Again, had a little bit of a delay here, and I apologize if you're listening on Spotify or Apple or anywhere that you get your podcast. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast. We go live every Tuesday on YouTube, and make sure that we have great content out there for you and interview some amazing chefs. And it's no different today. We have an amazing chef for you. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button, make sure you subscribe, and hit that bell to be notified for when we go live, as well as when we have new videos available for you. And I'm really excited today about our guest. This is a guest that's very special to me. He's been in our Chefpreneur community for a while now, and let me tell you, it's going to be a great conversation. I think there's going to be a lot of encouragement today on this interview and with this podcast. And without further ado, I want to welcome Chef Steve Hauser up onto the podcast. And from Idaho, Chef Steve, how are you doing today, my friend?
Doing well, thank you. We're having a bit of a heat wave. It's 30 degrees and about an inch of snow and ice on the ground still.
Yeah, I love how you said that heat wave, and you told me that before the show, and I'm like, that's so legitimately true for the area that you live in Idaho, which is not exactly Miami at this time of the year. And Chef Steven, I want to just tell everybody, you're the founder and owner of the Long Trail Chuck Wagon. And I want to dive right into it. As you guys can tell, if you're watching this on YouTube, I actually recommend you, if you're listening to this on, again, one of your podcast platforms, and just listen to the audio after we're done with this interview, I'd recommend you go over to YouTube and just take a look at how amazing this chef is. Okay, this is the real deal Holyfield here, cowboy. This is not, some make-believe gentleman. But it's just really good to have you on the show. Chef Steve, tell us about the Long Trail Chuck Wagon. Why that name? And I want to start off because you are a very specific kind of business. You do personal chefing and experiences, yes. But tell us what that means. Like, tell us about your business.
Well, in 2014, I was taking a business course, and it was to do cooking for special events such as weddings, anniversaries, and those kinds of things. And the Chuck Wagon idea came to me during that period of time. My professor was very impressed with the idea. And one night, the Long Trail Chuck Wagon came to me as the name of the company. And I've been in I'm retired from emergency services, 48 years in emergency services. I was a Navy corpsman and an Army medic, a firefighter paramedic for 30 years. Went over into the law enforcement side. I was a tactical paramedic with a county SWAT team, and I was a tactical paramedic with a federal SWAT team.
Wow.
But I also left the line in fire suppression and went into prevention and was the supervising fire post-bomb blast investigator. So I've been through all the ATF and FBI schools, been to the Middle East doing Homeland Security. One of my opportunities with the federal agency that I was working with have done VIP dignitary protection and some of those things. So I've been exposed to a lot of emergency services. Yeah. The Long Trail Chuck Wagon historically is talking about the cattle drives from southern Texas up into Kansas, post-Civil War, 1866. The beef industry, obviously, was just getting really started, and a lot of cattle in southern Texas. So they were being driven up into Kansas to the railheads to be taken to the east for beef consumption. The term cowboy came from obviously southern Texas, Mexico, as we would call them, cowboys, or the vaqueros, the Spanish cowboys. A lot of these men that were on these cattle drives were 18, 19 years old, which is where the term cowboy came from. They could be on the cattle drives as much as 3 and 4 months, driving as much as 2,000 head of cattle. There was maybe 12, 15 cowboys. And the better cattle drives were based on how well was the food, which is where the cookie came from. Charles Goodnight is attributed with finding and founding the chuck wagon, and was actually second in charge of the cattle drive. There was the trail boss, and then there was the cookie, and the cookie was the cook. He was the doctor. He was the barber. He was the arbitrator. If there was ever a disturbance in the camp, it was up to the cookie to decide, who was at fault or what have you.
Wow.
So the long trail. The other part of it is the long trail of my brothers and sisters in the military that have seen things, done things that they wish their minds could forget. And the long trail, they go through a lot of training. And, when they're honorably discharged, they're basically told, forget what you've done and seen and learned. You don't turn that switch off.
Yeah.
Firefighters, first responders, law enforcement, emergency medical care, firefighters, they see an incredible amount of stuff that most people maybe only see on TV. You don't see the background with the interaction with the families or, the patients themselves. All due respect to Hollywood, the actor that dies in this movie is back the next movie. In real life, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so the long trail home is helping my veteran buddies, first responders, that trail to come home. And there are a lot of great programs out there. For example, AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, has been around for decades.
Yeah.
The primary thing that is missing in a lot of these programs is the ultimate physician, Jesus Christ,
Amen.
who can not only heal the body, but more importantly, heal the mind and the soul. He doesn't take the memories away, but he gives us the peace to be able to handle those memories, i.e. the long trail home. And my motto is where food brings people together. An incredible amount of business deals have been handled on the golf course or over a meal. And a lot of my Lord and Savior's ministry has been over a meal or breaking of bread. So the long trail chuck wagon is where food brings people together and to be able to feed their bellies and then be able to talk to their hearts.
I love it. This is something that, we first met and you came to our retreat in Orlando. And, there was something, we met before that, obviously, on the phone, but, it really struck me as something completely different what you were doing. And I love how the heart of it behind it, it's very unique in that sense. I think it's not unique in the way that you feel about, of course, your brothers and sisters. I never served in the military, but that's the highest regard of the people that have truly sacrificed so much for our nation and for us. And so it's just wonderful, not only what you're doing, but even right now, just making more people aware of that. And it's true, especially even, and we didn't, it's kind of weird how God, ordained some of these things to happen. Not weird, but this ordained of like even what's going on currently in current affairs with fires in California and just your 48 years in emergency services. And again, what could be highlighted to a degree again is just the fact of those men and women that are putting their life on the line to save others, to save lives, property, the whole nine. And you have a firsthand account in your own personal life for that and with that, but also just again, how I love how you're using what God has called you to do in this business to bless and honor them and the depth of you even getting the it's kind of funny because it's the Long Trail Chuck Wagon. The name itself is so fitting with your amazing chuck wagon that you have, which we'll get into in a little bit because I want you to kind of brag about this restored 1890s chuck wagon that you own. But I mean, the name, even though it matches up the Long Trail Chuck Wagon, there's more depth to it, and I love how you really let us know that. That's really quite something. Um, so, Chef, tell us a little bit about this actual chuck wagon. You were mentioning the kind of the creator per se of it, but tell us a little bit about your own chuck wagon and I don't want to spill the beans here on a few things because I know there's a couple little facts there about your personal, this amazing asset that you have as a chuck wagon. But tell us a little bit more about it. I'm a history buff, so I love learning about this. Maybe other people don't, but hey, it's the podcast and we're able to discuss this. But tell us a little bit more about what your chuck wagon is and what year is it, and just give us some of the accolades. I know it's actually won some awards and been certified and things like that. So tell us about that.
Well, it's a fully restored 1890s Newton chuck wagon. The box and the drivetrain are 135 plus years old.
Wow.
The chuck box obviously would be considered new, but all of the parts to the chuck box, which is essentially your pantry and kitchen in the back of the chuck wagon, is all restored parts from other old wagons. It is a registered chuck wagon with the American Chuck Wagon Association, and it is the only registered chuck wagon in the state of Idaho that I'm aware of.
Wow. What does that mean when you say it's the only registered? What is that actually like? Is it an association that legitimately like just has a certification for that? It's a special process.
Yeah, it's a special process. It actually I had to put essentially a dossier together with photographs and documentation to prove that it actually was, an 1890s vintage chuck wagon. And there's markings on the wagon. There's serial numbers. There's metal parts that can be verified. And it took several months for the American Chuck Wagon Association to go through and verify everything to, in fact, get that certification and registration as a authentic restored chuck wagon. I have one of the parades here that's an annual parade. I took best of parade. Actually, the wagon took best of parade at the parade, and it has been shown at the Cowboy Ball. That's an annual large fundraiser for the fairgrounds, and it's been used a lot of events. There have been campouts where it's been. The North Idaho Draft Horse Mule Association has had the Wagon Down catering for their events, and done some catering for the North Idaho Saddle Mule Club and the Coeur d'Alene Muzzle Loaders and others.
Now, I actually want to go, and I'd like to put this kind of up on our screen here. This is the chuck wagon itself, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, isn't that a beauty?
This was a static display at the Kootenai County Fair, which is the North Idaho State Fair.
Wow, this is phenomenal. Actually, I'm going to lower our screen here because I just think it's really cool to see this piece of history. I mean, kind of showcasing some of your food here, which looks absolutely delicious. But
those are buttermilk biscuits that go really good with sausage gravy.
I mean, during the retreat that we were at, you made me biscuits and gravy, which was phenomenal. And I was on stage, actually, literally the story. I was on stage and we were sharing and teaching some other chefs about business and their, starting their business when we did that retreat in Orlando. And you told me you didn't want me to go parched, that I needed energy. But I'm like, okay, Steve, but you're giving me biscuits and gravy while I'm up here. I might also just pass out from a food coma, but they were so delicious. And but I just wanted to give people like a little picture and view of the chuck wagon. I mean, it's pretty,
The, the picture.
how many of these chuck wagons are there probably in the United States, Steve? It's probably can't be millions of them, obviously.
No, no. My wagon is number 87. I don't know how
Wow.
many wagons. This particular photo that you have here, just a little bit of history. While I was doing all this, I have cooked for decades, and I was the head cookie at the firehouse, and ended up feeding not only the firefighters but the police department, and it grew into I was feeding 15, 20 people a night when I was on duty.
Wow.
But I contacted this cookie in Texas. His name is Bit Pruitt. Bit is his stage name, if you will, as in bit horse. And I met him 2.5 years ago, and I got a hold of him. He does a cooking school for chuck wagons and Dutch ovens. And I got a hold of him, and I said, hey, I can talk the talk, but I want to be able to walk the walk. And he goes, here in Texas, we call that all hat, no cattle.
I
So
love
I
that.
went back. So I went back to his cooking school, and it was a great time. That was in Ringling, Oklahoma, which is the start of the Ringling Brothers Circus was there, and it was on a large horse ranch. 2 weeks later, I got invited to go back and help him actually cook on a 40,000 acre cattle ranch for spring roundup. The owner of the ranch, it's called the Circle Bar Ranch in Truscott, Texas, said, I want to keep the history of the cattle drive and the chuck wagon alive. So this roundup, we're going to live in teepees, and we're going to bring a chuck wagon in to cook for us. So for 15 days, we cooked for about a dozen cowboys, 3 meals a day. We had no running water, no outhouses, no nothing. We were out on the cattle ranch. And the second week, we had to move to another location, and we did it all by covered wagons.
Wow.
And so when I was leaving, talking with Bit, I said, thank you for the opportunity. It was great. I said, do I have any cattle now? And he looked at me and he says, well, pard, I'll give you a drop calf.
Nice. I love it.
So
That's like the tip.
yeah, yeah. So this past November, I got invited to come back and cook for his wedding. So that picture you
Wow, what an
showed of those
honor.
chuck wagons, I was cooking for his wedding.
That's so awesome. Yeah, honestly, it's just like there's so many things that come in my mind because I'm so fascinated with this. It's like it's starting to make it feel like it's easy to go and cook for clients and a little bit in their home and do a couple courses here and there. I mean, that one picture I was showing everybody in relation to basically in relation to the kind of all these Dutch ovens and all these things laid out. I mean, the timing has to be, you got to really know what you're doing in order for the timing to be right. Would you say that's a true statement?
Oh, absolutely. At the wedding, we had a 10-gallon cast iron cauldron and a 20-gallon cast iron cauldron full of beef tips, plus making the mashed potatoes, the string beans, and then we cooked 200 buttermilk biscuits in cast iron. It was all done over open fire.
Good Lord. Yeah, there's no up and down. I mean, there's ways you maneuver the wood, obviously, and all the stuff that you're doing. But there's no button to just say high, low, medium. I mean,
No,
you have to do what you're doing. And
your thermometer is your hand.
yeah, that's true. Just kind of feeling over it, right? I mean,
Correct.
really.
Correct.
Now, what would you say is, and you probably get this a lot, but I mean, like, what is a typical this is just me asking now because I'm just so curious. I've been diving into a couple even other channels that I have found where they do even like cooking from the 1600s and 1700s, and it's just interesting to see the dynamic of it and how simple some of these dishes were. But um, on a cattle drive, let's say we rewind, it's 1899 or 1898. We're taking cattle from, like you said, South Texas up to Kansas. What would be a typical meal that would be served that the cookie, aka the chef or the cook there, right, would cook for the crew? I mean, cook for the cowboys.
Beans, biscuits, and a lot of coffee.
Beans, biscuits, and a lot of coffee. Now,
Yes.
was the obviously, you have a supply of beef there. That's kind of what you're doing. But was that fresh meat, or was it, how did you like, or was it like salted beef?
Well, they ate very little beef.
Oh, okay.
They ballpark figures, they bought their cattle in southern Texas at about $12 to $15 a head, and then drove them up into Kansas where they could get sometimes as much as $45 a head.
Got it. Okay. So you don't
So
want to eat those because it's like you're
you're
eating
eating
your
your
money.
profit. Yeah, you're eating your profit. So the only time they got beef is if, a cow, stepped on a hole, broke a leg, or got injured, and then they would harvest it. But the thing is there was no refrigeration. There was no way to preserve anything on these cattle drives. And behind my head, you can see the 30-gallon water barrel. One of the things the cookie had to look for was water, because the only water they had was what was in that barrel.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
about every 2 or 3 days, the cookie was looking for water. So getting up in the morning, it was biscuits and beans, maybe some hardtack or some pork belly that they had salted. If the cookie could harvest deer or antelope or rattlesnake or turkeys on the way, that was where they got their meat from. But most of the
Wow.
time, it was beans and biscuits, and they might be carrying dried fruit and make a cobbler for them. But they were not gourmet feasting. It's like one of your pictures you showed were bourbon glazed salmon bites that I did for a bachelor
Yeah.
party. I can
Yeah.
assure you there were no bourbon glazed salmon bites on a cattle drive.
Yeah, I would assume there was nothing of that sort, first of all, right? I mean, I love, so again, like, you had to have obviously the cookie, man. It's kind of crazy, right? I mean, when you think about how much responsibility was on the cookie, like you said, you had,
Yes.
not only were you feeding the crew, feeding the cowboys, feeding everybody, but it sounds like they did hunting. They possibly did some trapping, right? Set out traps maybe for odd and end meat here or there. You had to make sure that you had the right inventory. I'm sure packing flour and getting that ready for the trip. Again, all the beans, all the things that you need to make the biscuits and the beans and so forth and so on. So a lot going on with that and a lot of responsibility. And so this chuck wagon was like their lifeline, right? I mean, this was really, if the chuck wagon just burnt up one day, I mean, everybody's kind of screwed, sounds like.
Yes, yes, and the responsibility of the cookie, as you mentioned, was huge. Um, a little folklore. One of the things the cookie, he was the first one up in the morning because he's making coffee and breakfast for the cowboys.
Yeah.
When we were on our cattle drive, and again, it's modern, but the principles were still the same. I got up usually about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning to start the fires and start coffee. Um, and the first cowboy came in about 5:30 in the morning with picked up his tin cup for coffee, and conversation consisted of morning.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then the jinglers, which were the two rookies, would go out and bring in the rumata, which was the horses. Cowboys would have breakfast, and they'd head out immediately to go rope their horse for the day, get them all saddled up. They'd head out. We're already starting to cook lunch. And
Yeah, it's crazy.
the cookie, one of the things he did at night was took the tongue of the wagon, which is where the team was hooked up, and he would find the North Star and he would aim the tongue of the wagon towards the North Star. So in the morning when the cowboys got up, the trail boss knew which way north was by the way the tongue of the wagon was pointed, because out on the prairie there was very few landmarks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just an open field. It all looks the same 360.
Correct. So then the cookie would have, once everybody's fed, he had to put everything away in the wagon and then had to move to the next spot to start dinner before the cowboys got there. A
Yeah.
typical
Wow.
day on the cattle drive was maybe 12 to, on an exceptional day, maybe 15 miles. So
Wow.
the cookie had to have dinner ready to go for these cowboys to come in and eat, because full bellies keep the drive going and kept the cowboys motivated to do what they had to do, which was you know in the saddle for 12, 14 hours.
It's crazy. You had to be a step. You really, I mean, the cookie had to be ahead of everybody, basically setting the pace, because
Yes.
you had to get to the spot before they got there, like you're saying. And then, of course, we all know cowboys don't exactly wake up late, and so they're up early. So, like you said, I mean, Cookie had to be up at 2 in the morning just to even start making a fire to even, basically brew the coffee. So,
Correct.
that's such an interesting thing. I mean, I love it. I mean, again, I love history. I have to ask. I know that I don't want to necessarily spend too much time on this, but I have to ask. What are your thoughts on? I feel like, and I'll admit, I've kind of got into it a little bit more. But I mean, with some of these programs, like what is the one? There's Yellowstone. Then there's like 19. Is it 23 or 24? Something like that. With kind of the pre
1883.
1883, and then there's another one 19 something, and it's all about these cowboys and ranchers. Of course, that takes place more in Montana in the sense of that, but you know, I feel like more and more people are getting intrigued. I mean, mainstream, mainline, and I think that also, I mean, it doesn't hurt your business in the sense of what you offer, because people are now looking and it's getting more exposure to a little bit of that life again. Now, these shows, I mean, of course they have, modern dually trucks and, Bentleys in the show and all that stuff, but really the concept of just a simple cowboy and being on the ranch, I mean, Yellowstone, I feel like it's and maybe I want your take on it to see if it's a little bit accurate, but when, me and my wife watched the show, and as we got into it, of course, there's all the drama. You got to have all the drama, whatever. But aside from all that, it's just even the ranch hands, even the ranchers and the cowboys working on the ranch. I mean, it's a complete lifestyle. I mean, they get up, they go to work, and they still come back home and pretty much play some cards and go to bed and do it all over. And they feel like their whole life is revolved around the ranch and doing that ranching, right, and work. Um, what is your take on that? I mean, of course, it's a modern thing, but I think it's kind of cool how it's bringing more exposure, I think, to the general public of some of these kind of these ways of life that unfortunately have gone away a little bit. Even in the show, at the end of the show, they're kind of like that was one of their whole big plots of Yellowstone, is like keeping that ranch alive so it could be one of the final frontiers of how it used to be, as opposed to it just being a shopping mall and an airport, right?
Right. Well, they're fairly accurate. 1883, yes, there's drama in it, but it is fairly accurate. A little segue. Bit Pruitt, who I went to his cooking school, and in fact, this coming March, I'm going to be part of his teaching staff at another ranch in Throckmorton, Texas. We're teaching
Oh
a
wow!
cast iron
Congratulations,
cooking
chef!
school.
Congratulations!
But he's in several scenes of 1883 as actually one of the actors, and he's also been in a couple of scenes of Chosen.
Oh wow! Cool.
Yeah, so it's pretty accurate. Um, One of the things that's interesting about those shows is showing really how harsh the environment was. And one of the things that Bit told me is, he says nobody's ever died or nobody's ever drowned in their own sweat. So working hard, it's a way
Yeah.
of life. And these cowboys that I was exposed to in Texas, The youngest cowboy on this cattle drive was 13 years old,
Wow.
and his sister was part of the cowboys. She was 18, and as feminine can be. When she would walk into the chuck wagon and the cook fly, the cowboys would either take their hats off or at minimum tip their hats to her every time she came in. Yet when it was time to go to work, she was not given the easy jobs. She worked as hard as all the rest of the cowboys. But there was the respect there. A little fun piece of etiquette with a chuck wagon is if you pull into the chuck wagon and I've got a white bandana hanging from the cook fly, which is the canvas above here, it means there's a female in the area. Watch your mouth and no spitting.
That's awesome. So it's like etiquette. It's like, yeah, it's like a white flag. Hey, watch yourself.
Correct.
No
And
inappropriate language as much as possible. No spitting or chewing tobacco.
There's a whole list of etiquette under the chuck wagon. That's, again, when we're doing the chuck wagon history and such, we bring all this stuff out to let
That's
people know
awesome.
that this is where we came from.
Well, I love it. I love it. And I think it also, again, it's like it's old times, but it's respectful, and it's there's manners and there's different mannerisms that are obviously traditional in what they're doing, which I love. And so um, I think this is one of the biggest things for me as well to ask you is like, you mentioned about hard work, and then what I want to do is transition and kind of open up. I don't know. It's so interesting asking you these questions because I mean you're such an expert. Do you mind, Chef, if I share your age with the world here?
No,
So you said you're going to be turning 74 in June. Is that correct?
correct.
I mean, if the only thing you take away from listening or watching this podcast is work ethic, I think I have to tip my hat to you, Steve. I mean, this is not easy work, okay? Being a chef is not an easy job to begin with. We all know that. But cooking in this kind of environment and in this style, um, you know, I kind of feel like a little bit of a a little bit of like, I kind of had it good. I mean, when you're working the line and you're working and you're sweating over the hot stove and it gets hot on the kitchen line when I used to, work in, restaurants and such. But, you could go to the walk-in fridge and just kind of cool off in a matter of 4 or 5 minutes. I mean, being out, in the sun, probably 90 plus degree days, and then you as a cookie literally having to cook over open fire that you can't, you have to have it hot because now you got a bunch of cast iron Dutch ovens and pots everywhere, which put off even more heat, right?
Yes.
And I mean, it's not even just about the hard lifting and the hard pulling, and because obviously we all know that those cast iron pots are not like little aluminum pots. I mean, these things are, it's a chore just to get those, situated where you want them because they're so heavy. Plus, then when you have food in them, I mean, it's a very physical job being a cookie on the long trail, right? So,
Correct.
And you're coming up to 74 now. I know that you went through quite some battles. You were telling me before the show on 2023, and we won't go through a whole list of those because unfortunately, you know what, God is good and He is greater and He's the ultimate physician, and those are in the past. And but you went through several types of cancer, different elements that came at you trying to take you down, and all types of stuff. But here you are, 2024, bouncing back, and 2025, we're declaring that this is, I mean, to put it into a simple form, right? Some level of, I wouldn't even say breakout year, but kind of a year to take hold. I mean, that inspiration, I want to hear from you, to everyone listening and watching right now. How do you get motivated when you're 74 years old to get up and, I mean, we helped you build your brand, build all of that stuff pretty much in 2023, 2022, 2023. We helped you, kind of really help create this brand of yours. And it was such an honor. But even back then, I was like, but now it's like you've gone through all this. The job is not easy. for all of us, including myself, I want to know how the heck you stay motivated at 73 going on 74 years old to not only work this hard, but like even to do the physical work, but even again the mental toughness of that. Like, and I don't want to say this in a rude way, but like, you know, you have a lot of wisdom and you are my elder and I respect my elders. And there's a lot you can impart on me and the rest of our audience. So just give us some downloads, Steve. Like how can we position ourselves to have that motivation? Because at this point, I find that I'm running out of excuses for anything that God is calling me to do. And I'm close to half your age.
Well, the short story is my eyes have seen a lot of things that I wish my mind could forget. Work in emergency services. I had several very close friends. One of my physician assistants in my Army unit kept telling me, you need to go seek help for PTSD. And the typical answer is, I'm okay. And it took a couple of years for me to finally realize that I was very broken and needed to go do that. Went through the VA program. It was 18 months long. It was a great program. And it peeled a lot of layers to the onion as to why I did the things that I did. Unfortunately, I was very addicted to pornography. And that was my dopamine drug of choice. But it ruined a family. It ruined, relationships with a lot of people. But one of the neat things about the program, but one thing that was lacking is it was not a faith-based program. The sign at the VA said, leave your religion at the door. Fortunately, my trauma group leader was a born-again believer. And he said, once we're in this room and the doors are closed, we can talk about anything and everything. Then one night I had a dream about the Lord spoke to me and said, you're getting help, but you need to get rid of this pornography. You're looking at women and dissecting them as opposed to looking into their eyes to know them. And I've been clean of pornography for 7 years. This past November was 7 years.
Praise God.
My life verse, to answer your question, my life verse is Proverbs 3:5-8. Trust in the Lord with all my heart. Do not lean on my own understanding. In all my ways acknowledge him, and he will make my paths straight. This is the one I still struggle with. Do not be wise in my own eyes. Fear the Lord. Trust in him. It will be healing to my body and refreshment to my bones. So again, coming back to the long trail, we have a lot of folks out there that have seen a lot of things that they wish their minds could forget. There's over a 400% increase in psychometric drugs that are being given to these people. And a bunch of the guys that were in my trauma group said within 3 days, they didn't recognize themselves in the mirror and flushed their meds down the toilet. Our PhD doctor from the VA said, look, I've taken care of 5,000 of you veterans. She goes, I don't write prescriptions. She goes, I don't want to write prescriptions. She goes, there's a time and a place. She goes, I'm not saying they're all bad, but just arbitrarily doing that is not right. And she goes, of the 5,000 veterans that I've taken care of them, none of my patients have started a pistol. She goes, but you go down to the VA hospital, all due respect to the hard work that they do. She goes, they can't give you that statistic. But more importantly, when I got involved with Celebrate Recovery at church, my ultimate healer was and is Jesus Christ. Do I still have the memories? Absolutely. Do they trigger me? No, because I can put them at the feet of the cross and say, Lord, here's another flashback. No, thank you. And he goes, I will give you a way of escape. My happy place is the kitchen. Cooking for others that have been through and seen more than I've seen, done more than I've done, to be able to sit down over a plate of hot food and say, let's talk. And let them unload. Because again, when you're high speed, low drag, and um, you get addicted to your own adrenaline, and then all of a sudden it stops, but you can't turn it off. And
Mm,
the challenge is being able to help these. One of the statistics is there's 22 veterans that are committing suicide a day. It's actually more than that.
yeah.
And so being able to get out there, and I'm nobody special. I put my pants on just like the special operations guys do, one leg at a time. But they've been through some things that none of us will even read about and understand.
Yeah.
And it's an
Sure.
opportunity to break bread over a plate and say, let's talk.
Man, that's so inspiring. I mean, it sounds to me just through all that, um, it sounds to me from what I gathered from it, really what keeps you inspired is again
Yeah,
the
helping
purpose
others.
of helping others and getting them and me and my wife we do this as well. We've actually been looking at focusing more on wouldn't say stepping down, but stepping out of serving in other areas at church to a degree, because we really feel like we're called more in this season right now to have people over for dinner and just have conversation and love on them. And again, I think that there is something so magical. I've said this many times myself about breaking bread and fellowship. I mean, Jesus sat down with the disciples over supper to announce what was to come, and of course gave us communion. And there's a reason of why pulling up to a table and nourishing our bodies and then nourishing our spirits and and our souls really with each other and conversation and laughter and sometimes you know um, coming alongside each other and even breaking bread when things are not doing, not going so well. It's all in communion, right? It's having communion with each other in fellowship. And so that's really inspiring, Steve. And do you see yourself slowing down?
No,
Okay. I love that. I love that. And, if I can, I want you to ask me some questions here and kind of flip the script, but it just what you said really resonated with me personally, if I'm being honest. It took me a while when you said when you have all speed and no drag and then you start to slow down, it does play with you a little bit. I've struggled with that in the past. I've struggled with anxiety of just being able to like I would feel anxious when I would just not do anything or relax because I was so used to working. And I'm a worker, I love working, but I had to overcome just not even feeling guilty and anxious when I wasn't working. Um, and again, like you said, you can get so caught up on the adrenaline, and I don't even think sometimes it's really consciously. I think a lot of times it's even subconscious. It's like you've done it for so long that it programs you, and then when you put it in, when you go from fifth gear to second, you that jerk happens naturally, right? Just like in a 5-speed car, it's like that jerk happens and you don't know how to handle it at times. And dealing with some of these people that have, I won't go into a whole other story because that's another thing, but I've met someone that was a Navy SEAL being in San Diego. He used to go to my chiropractor's office that I was going to there, and he was about 7 months out of the military in school. And let me tell you one thing about Navy SEALs. They do not, when they're having a general, like it was, we were sitting in the chiropractic office and his wife was getting adjusted and he was just sitting there and I was waiting for my turn with with the doctor, and we just start shooting the breeze. I introduced myself to him. Really nice guy. He's wearing a Hawaiian shirt, and it was just so funny because he didn't seem like the Hawaiian shirt kind of guy. He just, guy was ripped really well in shape, of course, a big old scar on his neck. I mean, the guy looked like he was out of a movie, right? Navy SEAL. And I'm talking to him and I said, well, how's everything going? Like, yeah, I'm retired military. And I was like, oh, what branch? We had a small talk and I got to knowing that he was a Navy SEAL and he was 7, 8 months out of the military. And he's going to, University of San Diego and going to get his bachelor's in this or that. And I mean, he's very direct. They don't like really beat around the bush, right? They're trained to be like, well, we're going to tell the truth. And I don't really care what happens. And he's like, I'm struggling in class though. I said, oh, is it really difficult, the information? He goes, no, it's difficult for me to pay attention. I have 4 Russians in my class. I have 2 Chinese. I have one guy from, with the last name that I think is Afghani. The professor is this. And it's hard for me not to try to summarize and take note of all these quote unquote foreign, and it's not in a racist way. It's he's literally trained that way. Like he's programmed. He's like, just 10 months ago, being in the military, if I would have had contact with a person that was from Russia, I'd have to have a 1-page, report on my conversation with them. Right. So, and then he's telling me that he got this scar. I said, "How'd you get that scar?" He's like, "Oh, I jumped out of a helicopter and undisclosed location." I'm like, "What the heck?" Like seeing things that he would have never. And then I said, "Oh, I like your shirt." And he goes, "Yeah, I'm forcing myself to wear this to try to fit in and try to become normal." That's what he said to me. He's like, I'm just used to wearing my shirts, like my military shirts. And like, so, he's battling, trying to get into, like you were talking about, into the quote unquote normal society flow. But you're talking to a Navy SEAL jumping out of helicopters and again, seeing things that none of us will even dream about. And then trying to feel normal going to school. It's really difficult. So, Steve, I know we have a few minutes left here. We've gotten to such a good conversation. It's a little bit of a different conversation than most podcasts, but I think it's just really, really, really not only informative, but honestly enlightening to a lot of people. I want to flip the script a little bit. Do you have any questions that I can answer for you and related to anything that you want to know, and kind of continue the conversation and flip the script a little bit for you to interview me with a few questions, and wanted to give you the floor to do that.
Well, a couple of things. My wife says my mustache is SEAM approved. And people go, "What's SEAM approved?" She goes, "Sam Elliott approved mustache." One of the things that I love about the Chefpreneur program, you having been an executive chef, and I've on Tuesdays, I now giving back. I cook for our Regeneration, which is a recovery program at our church, and I and a couple other chefs, we cook dinner for about 150 people every Tuesday.
Wow.
And that has been an incredible learning experience. Again, I'm still learning and am thankful. Chef Don was a chef in the Bay Area, or in the Seattle area. But before that, he was a combat medic, got his nursing degree, and then retired from the Army. So we have a lot of discussions about that. What I find interesting is leaving the executive chef world and being a chefpreneur, marketing folks. In the last couple of years, anecdotal experience on my part is the cost of restaurant menu items going up and customer service plummeting.
Yeah.
And one of the great things about the Chefpreneur program, as you have taught me and I am still learning, is being able to bring that experience to people. And if they want to show up in their feety jammies, they can. But they're getting a true food experience by us coming to their homes or establishment and being able to cook. Yet they're still expecting to be able to pay fast food prices from 5 to 7 years ago, and those fast food prices aren't fast food prices anymore. I mean,
True.
you go to some of these, fast food places, it's $20-$30 for a hamburger and some fries and a soda.
Yeah, that's crazy. I know. It's crazy.
And so when we're marketing, you once told me very eloquently, you went, "Chef Steve, your food is 20%. What you bring your customers is 80%. Meaning the total immersive experience. Food is wonderful. Food brings people together. I've had the opportunity in the past to go to black tie events in very large homes. We all ended up in the kitchen talking.
Yeah.
And so that's part of where food brings people together. And being able to have our entrepreneur chefs not only market themselves, but being able to price themselves legitimately. One of the things I've learned in the last couple of years, doing my what I call my beta food, taking samples to folks and doing small events and everything else, I've lost money. I'm not in this business to make money. Doing weddings and these other things, I'm not going to get up on a soapbox and preach. I'm going to cook and do what I'm going to do. My prayer is those types of events will be able to pay for the reach out to my veterans, my first responders, and those that are
Yeah.
on the trail home.
So is your question, how do you do that better?
Yeah, how do you better sell that? Look, you're not buying Joe's drive-through fast food.
Yeah. Well, it's a few fold, and it sometimes is hard to weave it. I will say, knowing you, Steve, one of the things that you probably, because your heart is so right? Your heart is really wanting to serve people. At the same time, you're needing this to supply the funds needed to do everything that you want to do. And business really does exist for a purpose and a mission. But the byproduct of that is profit. So it's like, it's sometimes difficult to weave, because when you're looking at it from a perspective, and we have other chefs that really want to do things in their business to feed other passions they have to help people. And just like anything in the world, I mean, it takes resources, it takes finances. However, there's twofold in this. Number one, it's learning how to position yourself in the marketplace, which I think you've done well. I don't think that's the issue. If I had a guess, it's probably saying no to the right people and yes to the right people, or no to the wrong people per se. And it's really hard for us to say no when we carry such a heart of wanting to help. What I've noticed, even in anything that I've done business wise, is people that, and for a lack of a term in this, it's not about the quote unquote money that we're charging, but when people pay more, they pay more attention. What does that mean? In a simple context, it's that usually people that invest or pay more in something, whether it's a product or a service such as yourself, it's weird how they value it better. It's kind of weird how that works. And when we allow ourselves to say no, it actually positions us. It doesn't feel comfortable, but it positions us to not only understand the value we provide, but even to communicate that value. Okay. Now, only you can select those people that you want to serve from your heart and do things out of that place. Not to say that you don't put heart in everything that you do. Of course you do. But you know what I'm trying to say. Like your brothers and sisters of the armed forces, your brothers and sisters that are, emergency service providers, the heart of people that you have goes in far from depth. Now, one angle you can take, and even with this podcast, as you share this conversation with people, I think you've been unique, and you've been a little bit of an anomaly, to be honest, with the people that we've coached and served ourselves, because you're one of the few stories that where you can combine people that do have the means getting behind your service and hiring you, but also letting them into your world of really what your true heart and mission is of why you started the company. Now, unfortunately, people do not tend to listen very well to a lot of things. Like, we've been at it here for about 55 minutes so far, and not everybody's going to stay on listening for 55 minutes straight, right? There's going to be a few people that do that. So communication is so key in how to weave that you're a high value, not high dollar, but a high value service, but in several ways. Number one, the experience is very unique. You cannot find what you do in New York City. It does not exist. You can't even find this in Dallas, and it's in Texas. Okay. It's very unique what you do. That's number one. Number two, it's also unique in the sense of what the mission is at the core of the organization and what you built. So combining those two. Now, the more that you add on those layers of who you're speaking to and who understands that and sees the value in that, the pool will get smaller. But the pool being smaller doesn't always necessarily mean bad, because we all know that there is a million people that like something, then it goes to 100,000 people that really agree to it, then 10,000 people who really like pull the trigger on it, and then it could get down to 100 core people that really support it, if that makes sense, right? So we have to take an approach to be able to do that. Being able to say no is where that first starts. I struggle with that very, very much at the first part of my business quite a while ago, because I had a heart to serve. Now, sometimes you're looking at it, and I hate to say it, but it's the truth. You're looking at it from a financial standpoint, and some people are like, I'd rather make something than nothing. But then sometimes, again, but see, that formula really doesn't work, right? Over time, it could be in a pinch, it could be in something, yes, but it's like a really quick, like putting a duct tape on a hole in your inner tube just to get down river, 50 more yards or whatever, right? It's a different quick fix, but it's not, let's saddle up on this tube and ride it for the next 3 miles down this river. No, it's probably going to be a bad idea, and you'll probably end up in the bottom of the river, right? So you have to look at your business in that way. And now on the tactical part of that, it's continuing to plug in to the right vein, as you will. I'm going to use some emergency service stuff, right? Tapping into that right lane or right vein, right, of where that blood is flowing of the ideal people that not only have the means, but understand the value. There's a lot of people that have the means to hire someone like you, or to hire anybody who's listening to this podcast and your services. It's just a matter of positioning yourself to find that vein to tap into. And again, the great thing about this is you don't need 50 million customers, right? You need the select few. I do think, though, Steve, and I know that you do a good job with this. I was actually reading the article that you just posted on your Facebook. I actually read it this morning in my kind of pre-meeting time before my day got started. And because I was just, preparing for the show, I was getting back into like, oh man, I got to see, I get to see Steve's face today. I'm excited. And I saw that article they wrote up about you. Now, it was a great marketing article, which was great. But I think you have a story to tell, Steve. I actually think that posting more simple videos of yourself speaking about the men and women that you love to serve, your men and women of the armed forces friends, the people that have struggled with these types of things. There's a lot of people that if they don't completely say, oh, I would like the service that you offer, they might say, let's give this service a shot because I like what he's offering of the mission as well behind it. And you're one of the few companies where people can really get on board with both. It's kind of like, we all know that these like fundraisers out there where they do like these $5,000 plate dinner type of stuff, right? Like they're really saying that they're not paying $5,000 for the actual plate, right? Then they say that, but they're like, hey, it's going to a good cause, doing air quotes because, some of those causes aren't exactly the best in my opinion, but whatever. But it's going to a good cause, but they're there. They're networking. They are enjoying a good meal, probably, hopefully. But they're also, again, networking, and they're looking at other opportunities of connecting and doing things like that. Now, with you really do have an amazing heart and a great mission behind this. At the same time, phenomenal product, amazing experience, superior value. And it's not every day that you get that. Now, some people might say, well, that's a country Western guy or this and that, and they can make stigmas. This is where I think you need to tap in more to your heart on the marketing. And it's difficult to do that sometimes, to get in front of a camera. I love how you're on the podcast, and obviously you did this with ease. It wasn't like it was super hard for you, but we get into our head ourselves. So we don't want to share that heart in front of people. But I think in your case, it's not about you talking about you all the time. It's talking about them. It's talking about the mission of who you serve and why you do what you do. I worked with you, and I knew the long trail chuck wagon to a degree of the meaning with that. But when you mentioned the long trail from people coming from, let's be honest, seeing things that none of us will ever understand, and kind of like mentally the depths of hell, and trying to come back out of it, it's a long road to get to even normalcy, right? Or whatever we define as normalcy. That was the first time I felt and heard that message loud and clear myself from you, right? And that really spoke to me, like, wow, like it's like a double meaning, but there's so much beauty in it. And you're not another person out there, and nothing wrong with, there's a lot of nonprofits, and you're not a nonprofit. It's not that, but I'm saying there's a lot of nonprofits out there that do really good marketing, get you really emotional, and yet 90 cents on the dollar goes to administration fees, and 10 cents on the dollar go to actual people who need it. Okay. I know Steve Hauser's not that. I can tell you. By the way, the entire audience listening to this, Steve Hauser is far from that person, right? In fact, he's probably the one showing up, giving the 99%, and really only asking for the 1% of help. But I think telling your story a bit more with that, Steve, and how it relates to the mission that you feel God has called you to do and be. And I think the exposure at that point, it might take some time, even more. But I would say try to make 2025 a goal of breaking out of, it's not about fame. It's not about glory. Like 2025, I want to bring a lot more content to my audience. And it's not to just market more. I was telling you before the show, I have a new podcast that I'm working on called, Chefs for Christ, where I just want to share God's word as a chef, my own revelations of what the Holy Spirit is showing me through reading his word. Nothing to sell, nothing to promote, other than just tune in. And hopefully it gives you some value, and possibly my prayer is that God uses me to speak his word to people who want to listen. And maybe some chefs don't want to listen to a preacher on a stage, or a preacher somewhere, but they might listen to my podcast and hear God's goodness, right? So it's Chefpreneur. Yeah, we're a company, we're for profit. We believe that if we have more, we can serve more. It's about the right heart position. It's about, like, I want to put out more content for Chefpreneur to honor and bless more people and encourage them more, because we truly believe in our mission, which is to help chefs and passionate cooks such as yourself start their business and do what they're called to do, and give them that avenue of freedom that maybe they didn't even know existed, right? So I think you'd be a natural at sharing that mission and that vision, and sharing your message. And I would say 2025, that should be at least one of the things just to get better at. Doesn't mean you have to go crazy and you're producing content every day, but just putting out the message. This is why we're here. Bringing exposure. Before Instagram, when Jesus used to come on the scene, in the Word of God, it says crowds gathered, or people gathered around him. Eventually, his name preceded him a little bit, right? Like, he would be going to a town and people would start to already be buzzing. And this was long before somebody could just get on Instagram and say, hey, I'm going to be on this street on Friday night. Come meet me, right? Like, God only knows if there was social media back when Jesus was here. I mean, that'd be the largest gathering in recorded history of people flocking to see him. Okay. It would make every stadium of Super Bowls look like it was a small group. Okay.
Right.
So, but realistically, that's what happened. It wasn't that he was trying to look for the fame. In our business, we don't want to be the center of attention, but it's also telling the story with psychology on how people receive it, where you're not talking and bragging about yourself, but you're talking about the mission, and you're exalting in the sense of, maybe that's a strong word. You're honoring the people that you want to serve in your mission, and inviting people into that story with you. This is what we do and why we do it for them. And when you invite people into a story, they feel like a character. And when they're a character in a story, they participate. And they might participate by saying, I want to support this company. You know what? We're doing a company retreat and we're hiring Long Trail Chuck Wagon to feed us for 3 days. And what happens is they're not going to nickel and dime you. They're going to say, no, I'm a character in the story now. You've invited me into this story that you're calling your mission of serving these people that are, just this podcast alone, sharing it with all the men and women of the armed forces, emergency services in Idaho and even beyond, they know just as well as you do those friends and family members that are hurting within their community as well with these types of things. And if they feel like supporting Steve and his company and getting, not only, again, first and foremost, getting an amazing experience. I love what your website says, experiences like no other, because it's literally an experience like no other. You cannot order a chuck wagon to pull up and serve you and your family, serve you and your guests. I'm telling you, in Midtown Manhattan doesn't work. Not even here in Georgia. I mean, probably in my backyard if it wasn't so sloped, but I can't fly you out in your chuck wagon. I mean, it cost me an arm and a leg. So it's exclusive. But again, people will say, let's get together and support. And so not only are we going to get a great experience, but we're going to get a byproduct of the heart and the mission of what this company and your organization does behind the scenes. And, I won't get into a whole preaching sermon here about meekness, but there's a level of being meek, but there's also a level of inviting, again, people into the story for their own benefit and allowing them to see, not for accolades for you, because I already know what Steve's thinking. I have to do some of the talking for him right now on this podcast because I already know your heart is as big as that wagon wheel behind you, and that's how God made you. And don't change ever again. Don't ever change. But it's okay to advertise and promote. This is the experience we provide. These are the services. These are the prices, and this is the value that we give you. By the way, there's more value to just the experience. There's also the value of you knowing that you're helping me support myself so I can then pour out into others that are hurting. And I think when you message that correctly, people will really see it. I hope that gives you some value, because I think just the history alone, I mean, you might even, and try some things out. I think that the story of the mission of the armed forces and the people that are in emergency service, that's definitely your peeps. I think that's, people are going to resonate to that story, and you inviting them in to be a character. And again, when they're a character, they participate in the story, and that means that they're hiring you, or they're spreading, even if they're just promoting you, right? They're literally saying, hey, hire this company. It's a phenomenal company, and here's the story behind it. You're also going to get the people like me, like I've told you many times. If I'm ever in Idaho with the family, which one day I'd love to take a trip there, it's gorgeous. Oh, we're hiring you. You might have to get me off your back, because I'm going to want to be starting the fire with you, because I love open fire cooking. I think it's primitive, and I'm kind of like, that's been, if you ask my wife, that's like my happy place. Starting a fire and throwing some meat over it, or just doing things outside. And I don't know, it's just something to it. But I'm also a history buff. I would love, I would, if I was you, like, there's history buffs that are even going to probably want to hire your services just so they could be around an 1890s Newton, chuck wagon. Because again, those things don't come around your corner every day unless they're in a museum somewhere. So I hope that helps you, but don't feel guilty, Chef Steve, about saying no to the wrong people. It's okay to say no. I always say to the students that I coach and the chefs that I coach, I don't walk into a Ferrari dealership and then cry that I can't afford one. Right? And people are like, well, that's ludicrous. We all know that. Well, It's okay when people walk into the Long Trail Chuck Wagon, they talk to Steve and they can't afford it. It's okay. It's not for them right now. That's not what we're, you know what I mean? It's okay. I don't go crying. I'm already expecting like I can't afford it right now, but it's cool to check out the cars. Hey, that's cool. Let me talk to Steve. Let me see this. Let me go to an event. Let me uh but the person controlling that narrative is you. And so don't feel guilty about saying no, brother. This way, when you say no to the right with the to you know to those to the right people, you say no to the wrong people, however you want to word it. It gets you to be able to say yes to not only the right people, but then also gets you to say more yeses to the people that you really have a heart for and a passion for, right? And so there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. My little piece of advice for you today. Hopefully that helped.
It does. It does. I'm working on a couple of strategic partnerships, and one of the things that we've talked about is um, I can help you, you can help me, we can work this together.
Yep.
And I'm looking forward to that. Just a little fun note. When I was coming back from Texas, I had my hat in my hand, and a guy came up to me and he goes, "Dude, I like your hat. Did you buy it with those sweat marks?" I said, "No, those are the real sweat marks." He goes, "Wow."
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, right? I mean, that means that cookie is doing work. That's what that
Yes.
means,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And by the sweat of our brow, again, we're serving one another, and you're serving. And listen, if you guys, I'm going to make the pitch for Chef Steve. If you guys are ever in Idaho, you're in that area. I mean, he's been down to Texas. He's able to do certain things. This guy got equipment. This guy got things. You can definitely talk to him. But go to the longtrailchuckwagon.com. Check out his website. Get in contact with him. If you're watching this and you feel like, man, I just love what you're doing, wherever you are, reach out to him, because this man is full of inspiration. He's full of wisdom. His food is incredible. Okay. Those carrots, I've tried to, I want to replicate those carrots. I don't even know how it was like Chipotle honey, something wrapped in bacon or something like, listen, I can eat carrots like that every day of the week. I'll still get my veggies in, right? Like, he's not only a masterful cook or cookie, according to him, he's an incredible human being. You can see his heart that he has is on fire for God. Support him. The longtrailchuckwagon.com. Just check out his website. Go there, click around. We were so honored to help you build your brand, Chef Steve, and we were so honored to have you in our community. Is there any closing words that you want to say before we close out the show? Anything that you want to tell anybody? Last words here.
Well, the help that you and your staff have been to me is huge. Helping me with my website, and I can't tell you how many compliments I've had from people saying how professional the website was and is. Your continued help and support again from you and the team. Their heirloom bacon wrapped carrots in maple sriracha glaze.
Oh, they're so delicious. It's ridiculous how good they were. So
And
good.
and again, where food brings people together. And as Kent Rollins with his Chuck Wagon always says, you can't get full on fancy. But I tell you what, a good ribeye over mesquite and some serious taters and gravy, buttermilk biscuits, you will not go away hungry.
I love that. I love that. Chef Steven, thank you so much for being here, my friend. It was such an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to have you on. I speak and pray many blessings over you and your company and your business. And 2025 is, listen, we're above ground and God's not done with us yet. As you said before the show, we're still here because God's not done with us yet. And we're going to continue to pursue his goodness and pursue the call on our lives together. And thank you for sharing a lot of these inspirational words, my friend. Listen, guys, if you guys, again, are listening to this, like this video, share it, subscribe to our channel, hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you subscribe on any podcast platform you're listening to this to. And I just want to thank you guys always for tuning in as well. If you're listening to this podcast out there as well, give us a review. We'd love a 5-star review. And just if you're tuning in, to share the message and, again, share all that we're doing here at Chefpreneur. Until next time, guys, I wish you well. God bless you, and we'll talk to you soon.